Hello, welcome to the last session of the abstract painting course. Today I'm going to be showing you different ways of creating a textured surface which you can then paint over. And we're going to be using either tree bark or rock surfaces as inspiration. Okay? Now I'm going to start off by showing you the sorts of materials that you can use. I mean, this is just a selection. Just use your imagination to see what you've got laying around. So this is going to be a combination of sticking materials on in a collage and also then using things and mixing with glue or paint, and you can also then spread those on as well. So things like textured, if you've got any textured wallpapers or sandpaper ripped up, that's quite nice to use. Tissue paper that you can sort of scrunch up, glue on to get some sort of scrunched up, sort of crinkly, creasy texture. Corrugated card is always good to use, particularly if you sort of rip it quite randomly. You get these interesting different layers appearing where you've got sort of the top layer and the bottom layer revealed. That's quite nice to give you a bit of texture. Also, you can add, if you want to, pieces of fabric. I've got sort of bits of hessian here, that type of thing, which is really nice because you can pull it apart and use it, you know, as you will, to sort of get different marks and the way that you want the threads to go. Just ordinary sewing threads or embroidery threads glued on are great. Bits of string are really good. Even things like the sacking that you get logs and things like that in, that works very well. The sort of plastic netting sort of stuff that you get fruit in and vegetables. The other thing I found that I really liked, which I was quite surprised about, is these fabric dishcloths that you can buy in the supermarkets, or just if you sort of cut them, they fray in a really interesting way and you can pull them apart and get some quite nice edges there, which I've used in one of my pieces and I really quite like those. So that's collage materials that you can glue on. I'm now going to show you other things you can add to the paint. Okay, so I've got some sort of sample pages here. This is flour, just ordinary household flour or corn flour you could use, mixed with paint and applied on. Applied on with a plastic knife or palette knife if you've got them. If not, something like a lolly stick works really well. Just putting it on and stippling it or sort of swirling it. Plastic fork's quite nice as well, sort of swirling it around. I'll show you, I'm actually going to do a demonstration of this in a second. This one is just sort of stippled on. And I've got some other examples just here as well of creating quite interesting textures using the flour. And these other examples are the scrunched up tissue paper that's stuck on. And then what we do is right at the end, the last process, sort of dry brushing over the surface to create and actually bring alive the texture that it created. Actually really makes it pop out, the texture. But I'm going to show you the dry brushing technique towards the end of when it's time to do that. But I'm going to first of all show you using the flour. So I get a bit of paper here. Just get some acrylic paints. So we're going to be using acrylics, and we can use either inks or anilinki's or watercolours as well with this. So we're going to apply the acrylics first, and then we can, if you want to, you can let some watercolours or inks or anilinki's run and drizzle in the texture, and then we can do some dry brushing, but it's entirely up to you. So I'm just mixing a little bit of the flour with the paint. Can you see you get sort of, so it's quite, you get a texture so it's spreadable. All right, that's the plan. And then once it's dry you can work over. I'm just going to show you applying it in different ways. So you can spread it on quite thinly, so it almost just looks like brush marks. You can put it on and sort of swirl to create textures. That works quite nice if you have a fork actually in there as well. I might get my plastic fork, just do some swirls. The other thing, you can get a little bit, you can even get a bit on a fork and actually apply it to get these sorts of marks, just raised sort of linear marks, quite nice. you can put it on and you can sort of stipple it on as well if you want to. You can sort of put it on and stipple. So you're getting little peaks and troughs appearing. Just trying to think what else I can do. I can have a little play, and actually I'm going to try and put this on and actually almost make, you could build up almost ridges with it, this sort of thing if you wanted to. You can actually put it on fairly raised. Obviously the more you put on, the longer it will take to dry. The thing with this, when you dry this with a hairdryer later, you need to be careful that the underneath is dry, not just the top, because acrylics, when they dry, they get a sort of skin on them. And you may find you need to sort of touch it with your finger and check it's sort of dry properly and not gooey underneath. Because if it is sort of still gooey underneath, you may need to leave it overnight to dry, because, or several hours at least, because if you go start painting over the top and it's still sort of damp underneath, what you're doing, you'll be squashing the texture basically. It would just be flattening it again if you put pressure on it. So you see, because it'll build up fairly interesting textures just by mixing a little bit of flour with the paint. Okay. I'm now going to show you something else. Now I've also been having a little look around the kitchen to see what I could find to mix and paint. So that just I thought, if you know, some of you haven't got textured wallpapers and things, you might still be able to add texture in other ways. So what I've done some experiments, and I've glued some things down and then I've painted over them and dry brushed them over here. So I hope you can see this. So here I've got fennel seeds stuck down. Oops, this is just ordinary tea leaves, which I actually really liked. It gives a really nice sort of scrunchy texture. Coriander seeds, I've got some lentils here, some sesame seeds, oats. You could try rice, you could try all sorts of things really. But I just thought, use your imagination and see what you can come up with. Now, as I said, we're going to be basing the texture actually on either some of the rock surfaces or tree bark images that you've got, and sort of revisiting those. And there's some different ways that you can approach this. I'm going to start with this one. This one here, I've actually based this on two different images of tree bark. So I like the texture on this one. So what I've done, I've actually looked at the texture and actually sort of interpreted that. So I've actually built the background up with scrunched up tissue paper. I have then applied little bits of string and threads, sort of mirroring some of these textures down here. And I've used little bits of corrugated card to get some of these more linear marks. All right. I've then, what I've done, taken the texture of one picture, but then I've based the colours on another picture. So I've actually used the colours on this tree bark image to create the colours as my inspiration. So sort of different shades of greens, reds and oranges and some purples. So you can take texture from one image, colours from another image. Okay, that was just one thing I thought you might want to try. And what I've just done here, I've got photographed it as I went along so you can sort of see the process. So what I've done, I've painted it all with an undercoat of acrylics, which is what we're going to use first of all. Then, particularly if you've got quite a lot of strong texture, it works really nicely if you put some Anna Linky's watercolours or inks on and let it sort of run and trickle like we would have done previously. Let it run and it finds its way in amongst some of the ins and outs of the texture, which can be really quite interesting, much more interesting than just painting it with a brush. Dry it off, and then what I've done, I've added final touches of colour, dry brushing, which is a process I'm going to show you sort of as we come to that stage at the end. All right, so that's that one. Now another one I have created, I've actually looked at rock surface. So this one here, this one, I've actually looked at the surfaces of a rock to get the texture. So I was looking at some of the sections on here, and what I've done, I've actually used scrunched up tissue for the background. I've then put some strips of textured wallpaper and little pieces of textured wallpaper, because I really like all these small little sections in the rock at the bottom here. I really like the small sections and a sort of bigger swathe of texture. That's what I was looking at. And I've also actually put some little pieces of cut up, oh, I forgot what it's called, kitchen scouring cloth. What are they called? Dishcloth. Sorry, I forgot what it was called. Dishcloth. I put pieces of the dishcloth, which I really like because it sort of frays really nicely and you can pull it out and get some nice little threads. So I put that in there. And again, this one, I have used a base of acrylics first. So this is what it looked like when I'd just done the collage. I photographed it before I started painting. So you can sort of hopefully see here the tissue paper, the textured wallpapers, and the little bits of dishcloth that I put down in there. Then I painted it all dark blues and purples. And then what I've done, I've added other touches of colour in here. And I've dry brushed it with some white, greens, and a little bit of gold in there. I also did put in some dark Analinkis to get these really dark blues. I actually went in and put some dark blues and a touches of purples actually with Analinkis as well. All right, so what I'm going to demonstrate to you today is another version. So we've got looking at one picture for texture, looking at a second picture for colour inspiration. This one, I've looked at the texture of the rock, but then what I'm doing, I've completely ignored the colours and I've just made the colours up. All right, so just go wild, whatever colours you like, all right, with this one. So just looking at the texture as inspiration, then not worrying too much about the colour at all on the image. And the third thing I'm going to show you is what I'm going to be doing a demonstration of. I'm looking at these pictures of a dry stone wall and these sort of sections and almost like shards of rock, which I think are really quite nice, sort of weaving in and out. And what I've done here, I've actually got some textured wallpapers which I've ripped into sections and put down, and then here I've got a band here of flour which I've mixed up with tea leaves actually to give a bit more scrunchy sort of texture, and I put that on and dried it all off. So this is all nice and dry. So I've mixed the flour with some white paint on there, all right, and painted over the tea leaves just to sort of embed them in a little bit more really. So you need to make sure that's thoroughly dry. And what I'm going to do with this one, I'm going to use this as inspiration, but I'm just going to exaggerate the colours slightly on this one. So I really quite like this band. This is the sort of dry stone wall near some water, so you've got all the lovely yellows and orangey lichen growing on the bottom, which I think is great. So I'm going to do, where I put the texture flower, I'm actually going to do that's the hopefully idea, I'm going to do a band of another colour on there, a bit like a tide line. All right, so get the paints ready and I'll show you what we're doing. Okay, so I've just put a plastic board down so I don't make too much mess, and I'm now going to start painting with acrylics. Now I'm going to be using different shades of sort of purples and pale blues for this sort of interpreting the greys in these rocks. So I'm going to be using some ultramarine blue, some cyan blue, a little bit of magenta to make purples, which I've sort of done here, and also I'm going to add some whites to make some sort of paler shades. All right, so I'm going to start putting this on. Oops. And applying these. All right, so just gonna whack it on. And what you want to do, because you've got quite a lot of texture on this surface, you need to sort of stipple almost and wiggle the brush around, scrumbling it in, so you're getting in all the little nooks and crannies, because you don't want any white areas really showing up at this stage, so you're going to need to get into all the little crevices. All right, so just going to start working the colour in, and building up this surface. So you can actually add colours while it's damp if you want to, and actually just adding a little bit of purples in here with the blue, a little bit of variation. This is just the basic undercoat really, so don't get too bogged down with the, you know, getting the colours dead accurate at this stage, you know, the colours that you want to use in the end, as long as you're just covering up all your white. Okay, so I'm going to work my way around here and be doing this, getting rid of all the white. I'll just carry on and then come back to you. Okay, so I've built up the surface with sort of pale blues and lilacs and purples, just letting the paint sort of blend on the surface, and merging it. Sometimes I was rubbing it a little bit with my finger just to merge the edges in. What I'm now doing, I've dried it all off with a hairdryer. So now you know, because acrylics are not re-wettable once they're dry, you know that's not going anywhere. You can add what you like over the top of this. I forgot to tell you actually before we started what I was basing my collage on. I'm actually just using bits of old packaging card, actually thin card from this is an old cereal packet actually, so that sort of thing is actually perfect for a background. Sorry, I forgot to say that at the beginning. What I'm now doing, I'm going to be adding in some more watery paint. I'm going to use some Anna Linkies again, or I'm going to also show you in a minute that if you haven't got any Anna Linkies or inks or anything, you can actually really water the acrylics down and use them and let them run as well. So I'm going to, I know it sounds a bit strange, but I'm re-wetting this, partly because if you've got a dry surface, you put paint on it and you can't get it, won't run anywhere. It needs to be, the surface needs to be wet to get it to run. So I'm going to, got some purple and some dark blue Anna Linky here that I've just put in my palette. So I'm now actually just going to grab some of the purple and I'm just going to try and get some bit more darker areas going on, just a little bit. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to let this run and trickle, and you can see hopefully that because you've got a nice textured surface, it sort of finds its way quite nicely. I'm going to put some blues in here. You can see that's running and trickling really quite nicely down here. So you just need to be a bit patient with it, let it run, find its way. So you can see that it's running down there, trickling along. I'm going to grab a bit more purple, I think. Here, a bit more purple. So I'm interpreting the greys of the rocks. I said I was going to exaggerate the colours. I'm interpreting them as blues and purples because I don't want grey. Some darker colours going in here. Then I'm going to come and I'm just going to let that then run. You just need to very lightly trickle, let it trickle down and run. Put a bit more on. Add some blue. You can see that's just trickling nicely into the sort of textured areas. That's created some nice things going on. So I'm going to dry this with a hairdryer, then I'm going to apply a little bit more. Okay, so I've dried this off with a hairdryer, and Anna Linkies tend to soak in and they dry much lighter. I'm just also going to show you that you can use acrylics in a similar way. So what I've done here, I've got some acrylics and I've just really adding a lot of water that's really runny, and I'm just going to show you again letting that run and trickle. So I'm going to put some of this on in a few areas. And the same sort of process really, we're just going to encourage that to run. So this time this is acrylics. So if you haven't got any watercolours or inks, this is another technique you can use. So get a little bit of Prussian blue here. Just get a few little darker areas going on. Not sure that's quite the right colour, but great thing about acrylics, you can just cover them up, so don't worry. If you're not keen on it, we cover it up. Hoping that will merge in a little bit. Okay, that's it. That's it, that's the idea, getting it to run and trickle. I just want to, okay, I say create one or two darker areas within this image. There we are. Just putting a bit of water on now to encourage that to run a little bit. That will run and trickle down. Great, that's better. I'll turn it up the other way and let it come back this way now. That's it. Good, that's better. Got a little bit more contrast now. A little bit more in here, I think. And I'm going to add a tiny little more touch of like purpley colour. There we are. Dry this off. Right, so I've dried all this off now, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to start adding my next colour. So the thing that I loved about this image that I'm working from as an inspiration was this lovely sort of orangey yellow line there. So I'm actually going to then interpret that now with some colour. So what I've got some cadmium yellow, some lemon yellow, a little bit of yellow ochre, some magenta and red to make different shades of oranges and yellows, so that I'm going to slap some lovely colour on here. So I'm working on, I've got a sort of an area here that I've used with flour with some tea leaves in it, actually, to get some interesting texture. So I'm actually just sort of stippling the paint on in this area initially. So I'm just using cadmium yellow initially, and then I'm going to start adding some other colours in. So I'm just going to create a sort of a band along here, and then I can always dry brush some of the other colours, this colour, in other areas if I want to follow it through a little bit. So just getting that nice band of another colour going on in there, which is, I say, what I always find quite exciting about this. So I'm now going to come in and get some oranges in here. I'm going to start getting some orangey colours. Let's have a little look. Ooh, I've just mixed up a couple here, so I'm just going to start stippling on some other little bits of colour. Now the colours are merging rather a lot now, so what I need to do, I probably need to dry this off, and then I can add some more colour without it actually physically blending. Now I've dried it off. What I'm now going to do, it's all looking a little bit samey, so I've got some lemon yellow, and I'm just going to come in here and daub a few little bits of, so I've got some slightly lighter areas in here, and I'm just going to actually blend those in a little bit. There's a bit more variety in there to lift it a little bit. What I'm going to do, I'm going to then show you the dry brushing technique that I was talking about. Just knocking it up a little bit, just I've got a few areas, a little bit more variety, and that's a bit better. So just need to make sure this is nice and dry, and then I'm going to show you dry brushing. Okay, here's the sample I made earlier using the flour mixed with the paint, and I'm just going to show you dry brushing. This one here is a little bit damp still, but basically you get a very dry brush, just a little bit of paint on it, and I'm actually going to take the excess paint off here and literally sort of lightly drag, and hopefully you can see that the idea is it's catching on the raised areas of the paint but not on the little grooves. Let me come on with another colour to show you. I'm just going to hold that up to the camera so hopefully you can see that actually really brings the texture out. So that's how we're going to finish our painting. All right, once you're happy with all the colours, we're just going to do some final dry brushing in contrasting colour. So I'm going to start off by dry brushing the sort of purpley bluey areas, okay, to start with. So I'm just going to, I've got a nice dry brush. Sorry, that one wasn't quite dry enough. Here we go. Oopsie daisy. Right, so I'm going to be using shades of very pale blue sort of grey colours over here. I'm just going to come across, just going to dry brush some of these colours over. Just a little bit more down here. So that's a sort of dry brush with sort of pale blue to start with. So what I'm going to now do is I'm going to start adding a few other colours in there rather than it just being pale blue. I'm also going to add some actually slightly more turquoisey blue, just to jazz it up a little, just a tiny bit. Not too mad, but just a slightly more bluey colour in some areas. So I've got a bit of variety in here. Again, I don't want to do it everywhere. A bit more exciting. There, that's better. So I've got some shades of a bluey colour going on. That's better. I've zazzed it up a bit. Hope you can see that. That's made it a bit more interesting. Okay. So what I'm now going to do, I'm going to start adding some lighter colours in here, and then I'll probably also dry brush some darker colours over. So I'm going to start to work on this area next. Okay, so I'm going to add some lighter sort of yellowy colours into here. So I've mixed up sort of a peachy colour here. So I'm going to come in and just add a few areas in here. I might just echo those colours just in a couple of other places. Just rubbing that off a bit. I quite like that actually on there. I'll put that, mirror that up there a little bit. That's more interesting. That's more interesting actually. Yes. I wasn't intending to do that, but I quite like it, so I'm going to carry on. That's made it a bit more exciting actually. I've got those little touches of colour just in there. Right, now I'm going to come in and start putting some oranges in, some slightly darker oranges, some burnt oranges. So I'm going to make sure my brush is nice and dry again, and come in with some bright orange. Take the excess paint off the brush again, and just going to come in and do some dry brushing with the really bright orange. Zingy. Just put a couple of little touches coming through a little tiny bit as well. I'm going to do a few little tiny touches just where I added the yellow earlier. Quite like that. Right, and I'm going to see about maybe even adding tiny touches of bright red, just a tiny few. Remember, I'm exaggerating these colours, I'm not actually going for what's really there exactly, so I might even just make that a little, that's it, just a tiny bit bolder in a couple of places. Let's jazz it up a bit. Just a tiny bit, don't get too mad. Right, I'm going to stop now, and I'm actually just going to stop a minute and have a good look at it before I do any more. Okay, so here is the finished piece. I'm happy with the colours on here. I don't think I want to do any more. One thing you might want to try to develop your piece further is you could try photocopying it or photographing it and printing it on the computer and playing around with the scale and the proportions of this. I was just playing around with this and thinking if I added and extended this a little bit further, this is just a photocopy, and maybe playing around a little bit with echoing that orange band again, that improves it or not. I quite like it like that, so that's a sort of another thing you could maybe play around with, just seeing what would happen if you changed the composition a little bit. So that's another thing you could have a go at. So that was the take that away, and you've got, you decide which you prefer. Could be either, couldn't it? That one or that one. Okay, that's one other thing you could try. Before we go, I just thought I would show you these. It's an artist I've discovered online called Carol Nelson, who's looks at rock faces and dry stone walls, and I presume she uses oil, but she's got some sort of collage textures in there as well. So you might want to have a little look at her. I think her work's lovely. Very inspiring to look at. Okay, so I'm just going to show you the 3 final pieces again and remind you of the different techniques you can try. So this one was based on tree bark, looking at texture from one image and colour from another image. This second one here was looking at rock textures on a rock, taking inspiration from the texture but then forgetting about the image completely and just making the colours up, and you can do whatever colours you like, go as wild as you want to. Or there's this one where I've actually looked at the textures and the colours just from one image and just really exaggerated the colours, actually sort of kept a little bit more to the actual image itself. So I hope you enjoy this exercise and have fun with it. Go and raid your cupboards, raid your kitchen cupboards, and see what you can find to add to your paint to make some nice textures. And I really look forward to seeing what you all come up with, and talk to you soon.
If you've enjoyed this course, please fill in a feedback form on our website to help show our funders these courses are valuable. Details coming up now. Bye!